On a night when the wind carved through the pines and snow buried every trace of life, a desperate knock shattered the silence of a lonely ranch. A cowboy, haunted by his own losses, opened the door to find an Apache woman, frozen, barefoot, begging for shelter. What happened next would shake everything he thought he knew about survival, trust, and the human heart. The high plains of New Mexico in winter were not for the faint-hearted. Even the coyotes kept low when the sky turned to steel and the snow came sideways, blurring the line between ground and sky. Tonight, the world seemed locked in a cold so deep it stole the breath from man and beast alike. Will Parker, a cowboy whose days of glory were long behind him, moved quietly about his cabin, just one more shadow among many. He'd built his life on solitude, trusting only the reliable company of a sturdy horse, a stack of dry wood, and the flicker of his own thoughts. Since the accident that took his brother, Will's heart had become as closed as the frost-sealed window panes. Neighbors were rare out here and visitors rarer still. The world outside his cabin might as well have belonged to another time, another man. But that night, just as Will poured his supper into a battered tin bowl, he heard it. A frantic knocking, muffled but urgent, at the door. For a long moment, he didn't move. Out here, a knock in the dark meant trouble more often than not. Maybe a trap. Maybe someone running from something far worse than the weather. Cautiously, Will reached for his old rifle and cracked the door just enough to see a shape hunched in the swirling snow. It was a woman, Apache by her features, shivering, hair clinging in wet strands to her cheeks, feet bare and red from the cold. Her lips moved, voice cracked and thin. "Please, let me in." She had nothing with her, no pack, no weapon, just the desperation of someone on the edge. Against every instinct, Will's hand hesitated. He'd been taught to be wary, but there was something in her eyes, not fear, not anger, but a plea as raw as the winter itself. He stepped aside, letting the warmth spill out into the night as she staggered in and collapsed near the fire. As the door thudded shut behind them, the rancher realized this was no ordinary trespass. This woman was running from more than the cold, and letting her in was about to change both their lives in ways he could never imagine. And as the storm howled louder outside, Will wondered what secrets the night would reveal before the dawn. The warmth of the cabin barely cut the cold clinging to the woman's skin. She huddled near the hearth, arms wrapped around herself, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. Will knelt down, his cautiousness not yet gone, but softened by the obvious suffering before him. He placed a heavy blanket across her shoulders and pulled a second quilt from his own cot, draping it gently over her bare feet. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the spit and pop of pine logs as the fire gnawed at the icy air. Will studied her features under the flickering light. She was young, maybe not yet 30, with dark hair that spilled in tangled waves down her back. Her cheekbones were sharp, her lips split from the cold, but her eyes, those deep, dark eyes, watched him with wary resolve. She was no stranger to hardship, he realized. But she looked beaten down in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "Name's Will Parker," he said quietly, trying to keep his tone steady but not unkind. "I don't mean you harm. You need help or you need hiding." She opened her mouth, then coughed so hard she bent double. When she finally caught her breath, her voice was hoarse but clear. "Water, please." He handed her a tin mug from the shelf, warm from the kettle. She sipped, hands shaking, then managed, "I'm called Nahava." She paused, swallowing. "They turned me out. My people. I had nowhere left to go." Will frowned, his guarded suspicion shifting to something more like concern. He'd heard stories, of course, tribal disputes, punishments, exiles. The old ways still ruled out here, sharper and less forgiving than any law he'd ever known. "Why'd they do that to you?" he asked, soft but direct. Nahava shook her head, gaze falling to the fire. "I spoke when I should have been silent. I wouldn't marry who they chose." Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the memory of pain. "They said I'd cursed the tribe, brought shame." She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears and defiance. "I ran. Thought I could make it to the road, maybe find shelter before the snow. I was wrong. Will nodded slowly, letting the silence linger between them. Outside, the wind shrieked, rattling the shuttered windows. He rose, ladling beans and a chunk of cornbread into a bowl, then set it beside her. "Eat what you can. Warm up. You'll stay here till the storm breaks. After that, well, we'll see." She accepted the food with a whisper of gratitude, eating slowly, her hands wrapped tight around the bowl. Will watched her, his own supper forgotten, mind racing with questions. What danger might follow her? Would her tribe come looking? And what would the neighbors say, if any dared venture this far and found a stranger under his roof? But the more he looked at her, the less any of that seemed to matter. She was a human being, not some wild tale to be whispered about at the trading post. And if the world outside was too small-minded to see it, then maybe he'd just have to be bigger than the world. As the hours passed, Nahava's color returned. She drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring in a language Will didn't know. He kept the fire going, boots planted near the door, rifle close by. The night dragged on, long and restless, each shadow flickering across the wall like a memory he couldn't shake. In the middle of the night, Will woke to the sound of sobbing, soft, muffled, almost swallowed by the roar of the wind. He found Nahava curled in a tight ball by the fire, tears sliding down her cheeks. For a moment he stood there, uncertain. Comfort was not something he had much practice with, but finally he knelt beside her, awkward but sincere. "They can't hurt you here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not while you're under my roof." She nodded, wiping her eyes, then surprised him by reaching for his hand just for a second, just enough to remind herself she was not alone. By dawn, the storm had thickened, turning the world outside into a white wasteland. Will rose early, feeding the horses, chopping more wood, every motion deliberate and steady. When he returned, Nahava was awake, sitting quietly at the table. She watched him move, silent but no longer afraid. Over a breakfast of hot coffee and what little bacon remained, Will tried to piece together what came next. He learned that Nahava had grown up not far from these hills, had ridden horses since she could walk, and knew the old ways as well as any elder. Her exile had not broken her spirit, only bent it. She was tough, resourceful, and proud, qualities he'd always respected, even if the world called them trouble in a woman. And as the morning sun struggled to break through the storm, Will realized that sheltering Nahava was no accident. Fate, luck, or just the way of lonely souls finding each other in a vast, indifferent land, it didn't matter. They were here, together, and for now, that was all the purpose he needed. But as the day wore on, Will sensed that the real storm had only just begun. For outside these walls, old grudges ran deep, and both their pasts were far from finished with them. As the shadows lengthened and the wind howled louder, Will caught a distant movement through the frosted glass, a shape on horseback, moving slow and deliberate through the snow. Trouble, it seemed, was coming for them both. Will watched the rider move along the distant ridge, the silhouette barely distinguishable against the swirling snow. His hand hovered over the rifle, leaning against the wall, a habit born of caution, not violence. Nahava sensed the tension in him and stood quietly by the table, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. He tried to reassure her, forcing a calm he didn't entirely feel. Could be nothing, just a ranch hand checking fence lines. But I'd rather be careful. She nodded, eyes flicking to the window. "If it's someone from my tribe," she whispered, "they won't leave without me." Will considered this, the weight of responsibility settling deeper on his shoulders. He had brought strays into his home before, an injured pup, a runaway horse, but this was different. This was a person, and the danger she carried was not her fault. As the shape moved on, Will kept himself busy. He showed Nahava how to lock the back door, where he kept the firewood stacked, and how to use the iron poker as a weapon if need be. She listened closely, not with fear, but determination. "I won't hide," she said quietly. Not anymore. The afternoon passed in uneasy silence. Will tried to keep things normal, mending tack, boiling more beans, checking the animals in the barn. He caught Nahava standing in the doorway once, gazing out across the frozen pasture. She looked small against the winter, but not weak. He wondered for the first time how she had survived so long on her own. As dusk approached, Will saw her examining his lasso, fingers running along the rough rope with practiced familiarity. "You ride?" he asked, more as a statement than a question. She gave a hint of a smile. "Since I was little. My uncle taught me. Said a woman on a horse is as wild as the land itself." Will grinned, the first real smile in days. "Maybe that's why you lasted out here." For supper, they ate in companionable quiet. Nahava picked at her food, the tension in her shoulders never quite relaxing. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you believe people can change their fate?" Will thought about it, staring into his coffee. "Maybe, out here, you learn to make do. Sometimes that's enough to change everything." She nodded, seeming to weigh his words, then spoke again, soft but with a core of steel. "My father sold me because he thought I'd bring shame, because I didn't look like the others. Too big, too loud, too much of everything." She hesitated, then looked him square in the eye. "I won't be someone's burden again." Will met her gaze, something old and wounded in both their expressions. "You're not a burden. You're a survivor." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than either expected. The storm battered the cabin all night. Will barely slept, haunted by memories of his own losses, of a brother who never came back from war, of a time when he too was called too much, too wild. In the darkness, he heard Nahava moving quietly, sometimes sitting by the fire, sometimes standing at the window, always alert. At dawn, the world outside was muffled by snow, the landscape clean and unfamiliar. Will rose early, boots crunching on the frozen floor, and found Nahava already dressed, wrapped in his old jacket and ready for the day. "I'll help with the animals," she said simply, and together they walked through the pale morning light to the barn. She moved with purpose, hauling water, spreading hay, her hands quick and confident. Will watched her, impressed by the skill and strength in every motion. When she finished, she turned to him, breath fogging in the cold air. "Why did you take me in?" she asked, not accusing, just curious. Will hesitated, searching for an answer that made sense. "Guess I know what it's like to be left behind," he said finally. "And I know what it's like to prove people wrong." A silence settled over them, warm and understanding. Nahava brushed a stray hair from her face and gave him a small, grateful nod. Just as they finished, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the peace, slow, heavy, approaching from the tree line. Will and Nahava both froze, eyes locked on the open barn door. Will motioned for her to stay back, then stepped out into the yard, rifle loose at his side but not yet raised. 3 riders emerged from the woods, faces hidden beneath broad-brimmed hats and scarves. Their horses stamped and snorted, nervous in the cold. The man in front, a stranger but with the hard look of someone used to getting his way, called out, "Looking for a girl, Apache. She's meant to come home." Will stood tall, forcing his voice steady. "No one here but me and my stock." The man smiled, slow and cold. "Don't lie, we know she's inside. Her people want her back, said she's trouble." Nahava stepped into the light, chin high. "I'm not going back," she called. "I have a right to choose where I live." The riders exchanged glances, sizing up the situation. Will shifted his grip on the rifle, heart hammering. The lead rider swung off his horse, hand drifting toward his holster. "You sure you want to make this hard, cowboy?" The standoff had begun, and neither side would back down easily. The snow muffled every sound but the hard crunch of boots as the lead rider strode forward, spurs jangling with each step. Will kept his eyes locked on the stranger's hands, every muscle tensed, senses narrowed to the small circle of cold, bright morning where fate would be decided. Nahava stood behind him, refusing to hide, her jaw set with the stubborn pride of someone who had nothing left to lose. The second rider, a wiry man with a scar over one eye, remained on his horse, scanning the tree line, perhaps expecting an ambush. The third, younger and uneasy, kept glancing between Nahava and his leader, uncertainty written across his face. "We ain't here to fight," the lead rider said, voice slow, drawing out each word as if he relished the tension. "But the tribe wants her back. Says she ran. Says she's sick. dangerous. His eyes flicked to Nahava, calculating. Will stood his ground. She's not sick. She's not dangerous. She's a kid, and she's safe here. The leader smirked. So you'd put your own neck on the line for a stray? Will didn't answer, and the silence stretched. Nahava took a step forward, her breath visible in the frigid air. I'm not going back, she repeated, louder. They tied me to a tree because I wouldn't change who I am. I won't crawl home just because they're afraid of something different. The younger rider shifted, looking away. The leader, not missing a beat, drew closer, boots stopping just short of the barn's threshold. The law don't care what you want, girl. You belong to them until they say otherwise. Nahava bristled, but Will stepped between them, raising the rifle, not aimed but not hidden either. You're not dragging anyone away from here against their will, not while I'm standing. For a moment, no one moved. The horses snorted and pawed at the ground, steam rising in thick clouds. The leader's eyes went hard. You got backbone, I'll give you that. But this isn't your fight, rancher. Will didn't blink. It is now. A heavy pause. Then the leader jerked his chin toward Nahava. You're sure about this, girl? You choose the white man over your own blood? Nahava met his gaze squarely. I choose myself, for once. The scarred man spat in the snow, grumbling something in Apache Will couldn't catch. The younger rider looked almost relieved. Let's go, he muttered. She's not worth the trouble. The leader shot him a glare but seemed to reconsider. We'll be back, he promised, his voice turning cold as iron. You better hope you're ready when we are. He swung back onto his horse, the others following suit, and with a last hard look, the three melted into the trees. Will and Nahava stayed rooted in place, adrenaline pulsing through their veins until the hoofbeats faded into silence. Only then did Nahava sag slightly, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. Will put a hand on her shoulder, steady and gentle. You did good. You stood your ground. Back inside the cabin, the mood was raw but somehow lighter. Nahava tried to busy herself with chores, but her hands shook and Will saw it. Sit, he told her, pouring coffee into a tin cup. They might come back, but you're safe here as long as I draw breath. She accepted the cup, looking at him over the rim. You don't even know me, she whispered, vulnerable for the first time. Why are you risking all this? Will sat across from her, the weight of his own scars showing in his tired eyes. Maybe I know more than you think. People only see the outside. What doesn't fit, what's too much for them. I was the same once. My own family gave up on me after the war. Out here, you have to make your own worth. You don't have to earn it from anyone but yourself. For a long while, they sat in silence, the fire crackling, a thin beam of light illuminating the dust floating in the air. Nahava slowly nodded, something shifting in her. Thank you, she said, barely above a whisper. As the day wore on, Will set to work reinforcing the doors, double-checking the windows, and making sure the horses had extra feed. Nahava helped, silent but determined, soaking in every task. That night, a sense of shared purpose settled over them. They ate supper together, words no longer necessary to fill the space between them. But as the wind howled and snow piled up outside, Will couldn't help but wonder if their stand would be enough. The men who wanted Nahava back didn't seem like the sort to let things go. He glanced at her across the flickering firelight, seeing not a frightened girl, but someone forged by hardship, someone he might just come to trust with his own story. Just before dawn, Nahava shook Will awake, her face pale. From the edge of the woods came a strange glow, torches moving through the trees. This time, the men weren't alone, and whatever they wanted, they were coming to take it by force. Will didn't hesitate. The second Nahava whispered about the torches, he moved to the window, careful to keep his body out of the glow. 3, no, 4 torches, weaving through the dark line of pines. The flames bobbed, men's shapes huddled around them, advancing with a purpose that turned Will's blood cold. This wasn't a warning or an idle threat. This was a raid. He turned to Nahava, who had pulled on her coat over her nightgown, hair wild and eyes huge but steady. Go to the back room, stay low, take this. He pressed the old revolver into her hand. She stared at it, lips tight. "Will, just in case," he insisted. "Lock the door behind you. Don't open it for anyone but me." She nodded, clutching the weapon, then slipped away as Will grabbed the rifle and quietly barred the front door. The cabin seemed suddenly too small, every knot in the wood magnified, every shadow a threat. His heart pounded, but his mind was razor-sharp. He checked the window again. The torches were close now, voices carrying on the wind, half English, half Apache, a drunken, angry blend. A rock crashed through the window. Glass exploded inward. Will ducked aside as shouts rang out. "Come out, rancher, give us the girl and we'll leave you with what's left of your cattle." The scarred man from before stood just outside, holding a torch in one hand, a hatchet in the other. Two more hovered behind him, while the fourth circled around, trying the barn door. Will fired a warning shot through the window frame. The men dropped, startled, but the leader just laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the cold. "You got guts, cowboy, but you're outnumbered. How many bullets you got? You think you can shoot us all before the fire spreads?" He tossed his torch onto the roof's edge. Flames licked at the old cedar shingles, hissing in the wind. Will's heart seized. He fired again, grazing the leader's shoulder. The man cursed and fell back, but the torch stayed. The other men scrambled, one running for the well to douse the flames, another aiming his rifle at the door. Inside, the smoke thickened fast. Nahava pressed herself against the back wall, the revolver shaking in her hands. She could hear Will shouting, gunshots, boots pounding outside. The world narrowed to terror and the acrid sting of burning pine. Suddenly, the side window burst open. The youngest of the raiders, a boy really, maybe 16, climbed through, landing hard on the floor. Nahava stared at him, frozen. He stared back, eyes wide and uncertain, gun dangling useless at his side. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered. "They made me come." Before Nahava could answer, a distant scream cut through the chaos. Will fighting outside. She raised the revolver, hands trembling. "Stay back," she ordered. The boy nodded, dropping his gun, and slid back toward the wall. "I'm not like them, I had nowhere else to go." Smoke poured through the door. The flames on the roof caught fast, years of dry wood surrendering to the fire. Nahava's mind raced. She had to act. The back window. She rushed to it, wrenched the frame open, and gestured for the boy. "Help me with the horse." "We can pull it to the window, climb out." Together, choking, they shoved aside crates and kicked through the last panes of glass. Outside, the world was a whirlwind of snow, firelight, and chaos. Will fought at the front of the cabin, swinging his rifle like a club now, his ammunition spent. The scarred man tackled him, both men crashing into the snow, rolling, fists flying. Nahava hauled herself through the window, the boy following. They ran around the side, crouching behind the smoke. Nahava saw Will struggling, pinned beneath the bigger man. She didn't think. She ran forward, brandishing the revolver. "Get off him!" Her voice cracked, but the words stopped the attacker for a split second. Will managed to kick free, rolling aside as Nahava pulled the trigger. The gun's bark echoed, the shot missing wide but enough to scare the man off. He staggered to his feet and bolted into the trees, leaving Will gasping, face bloodied. The barn's roof caught, flames leaping high. Will staggered to his feet, pulling Nahava close. "We have to get the horses. Now." Together, they sprinted for the barn, the young boy trailing. Inside, the terrified horses bucked and whinnied. Will threw open the back doors, Nahava and the boy calming the animals enough to lead them out into the snow. Behind them, the cabin was ablaze, fire licking through the roof, lighting up the night like a funeral pyre. The last of the attackers fled into the trees, beaten but not broken. Will, Nahava, and the boy stood in the snow, shivering, faces illuminated by the burning ruins of all Will had built. Nahava clung to Will, grief and terror written in every line of her body. But Will only tightened his hold, voice ragged but determined. "We're still standing. They couldn't take that from us." The boy, sobbing quietly, looked at Nahava and whispered, "I can't go back to them. Please." As dawn broke over the smoldering wreckage, Nahava's tribe reappeared at the tree line, their chief riding at the front. They had come not with torches but with judgment, And this time their decision would change everything for Nahava and Will. As the gray morning crept over the charred remains of the ranch, Will barely had the strength to stand. Nahava leaned on him, coughing from smoke, the cold biting through her soot-stained nightgown. The horses, skittish and exhausted, stamped nervously in the snow. Beside them, the boy who had helped her escape knelt shivering, too afraid to look at the tree line where shadows gathered, silent and watchful. Nahava's heart hammered. She recognized some of the riders approaching, their faces familiar, yet distant, as if she were seeing her tribe through a layer of thick glass. The chief, a tall man wrapped in a wolfskin cloak, rode at the front, expression unreadable. At his right hand was Nahava's uncle, and behind him rode her older cousin, both men who had voted for her banishment just days before. Their eyes slid from Nahava to the smoldering ruins, then to Will's battered face. No one spoke at first. The chief dismounted, his boots crunching in the crusted snow. He studied Nahava, his gaze sharp. "You survived," he said in Apache, low and even. "We did not expect you to—" Nahava drew herself up, anger and shame warring inside her. "I was not alone," she replied. She gestured to Will, who met the chief's eyes without flinching. "He saved me. Twice." There was a murmur among the riders, surprise, some disgust, some confusion. Nahava's uncle spat in the snow. "You shame us, niece. You belong to us, not to him." Will stepped forward, blood drying on his cheek. "She belongs to no one," he said, voice ironclad. "Not anymore." The chief regarded Will with a measured respect, but his voice was cold. "You risk much for an outcast, rancher." Will shrugged, glancing back at the burned cabin. "I didn't ask for this fight, but I won't turn my back on someone in need." There was a heavy silence. Nahava shivered, half expecting the men to drag her away. But instead, the chief turned his attention to the boy at Nahava's side. Where do you come from?" he demanded. The boy swallowed, terrified. I was with them, but I tried to help. Please, don't send me back." The chief's face softened, just a fraction. "Are you Apache?" The boy nodded. "My mother was. They took me after she died." Nahava stepped protectively between the boy and her uncle. "He saved my life. If you blame anyone, blame the men who burned this place." The chief considered this, then looked at the smoldering barn and cabin. "We saw the flames from the ridge. We thought perhaps the spirits had finished what we began." His words stung Nahava, but she did not back down. "I am not a ghost yet," she said, defiant. Her cousin sneered. "You're alive only because a white man intervened. That does not make you strong." Nahava's fists clenched. Will moved to her side, standing tall despite the blood on his shirt. "Maybe she's alive because she's braver than any of you," he said, quiet but fierce. "I've seen men break under less." A tense standoff unfolded. The wind picked up, carrying smoke and the bitter scent of ruin. Finally, the chief spoke, voice softer. "It is true you were sold because you were too large." Nahava flushed, but nodded. "Yes, and I have nothing to be ashamed of. I survived what you would not have survived." The chief's eyes, and for the first time, reflected regret. "The old ways are hard. Sometimes we mistake strength for weakness, difference for shame. That was our error." Her uncle growled, but the chief silenced him with a raised hand. "You have proven yourself, Nahava. You survived the wild, the men who came for blood and the fire. You are not what they called you. You are not what we cast out." Nahava's breath caught, not trusting hope. The chief turned to Will. "You have nothing left here, rancher. Not a home, not even a fence. What will you do?" Will looked at Nahava, then at the boy. "We'll build again, somewhere else if we have to, but I won't leave her behind." Nahava's uncle spat again. "She's fat and disgraced. You'll regret it." Will met his glare. "She's the strongest person I know. That's the only thing that matters." There was a long, aching silence. The chief nodded once. "Then you are welcome to come with us until the snows pass. Food, warmth, for all of you. It is not a reward, it is what is right." Nahava blinked, not believing it. "You mean it?" The chief's eyes softened. "I do. The tribe needs people who endure, not just those who fit an old idea of beauty. As the tribe turned back toward their camp, Nahava, Will, and the boy followed, 3 outcasts, 3 survivors, finding a new beginning where everything seemed lost. But as they entered the forest, Nahava sensed eyes watching from the shadows. Someone who did not want her welcomed back, someone plotting a new betrayal that would threaten not just her, but the fragile family she had found. The forest swallowed them, snow crunching under boots and hooves as the small procession moved between ancient pines. Will glanced over his shoulder more than once, his hand unconsciously resting on Nahava's shoulder, as if to reassure himself she was really there. The Apache camp wasn't far, a cluster of hide tents arranged in a half-circle, smoke rising in thin, wavering lines above the trees. For Nahava, it was at once deeply familiar and painfully alien. She walked at the edge of the group, the boy beside her, clutching the tattered blanket Will had wrapped around him. His eyes darted between the returning tribesmen, afraid of rejection or worse, punishment. Nahava squeezed his hand. "Stay close," she whispered. "You're safe now." She wanted to believe it herself. Inside the camp, children and elders watched the newcomers in wary silence. Some of the women remembered Nahava, some with pity, others with open scorn. Her uncle broke away from the men, muttering to a few elders in the old tongue. Nahava caught words like shame, burden, and outsider. She flinched but straightened her spine. Will stood tall by her side, refusing to show fear. The chief approached a large communal fire and gestured for everyone to sit. Food appeared, stew bubbling in a blackened pot. Cornbread passed hand to hand. Will helped Nahava sit, but before he could take his place, her uncle blocked his path. "White men eat last," he spat. Will didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. Nahava's cheeks burned with humiliation, but Will's only answer was to settle quietly on a log at her side, unbothered. The boy huddled close, hungry and uncertain. The meal passed in tense silence until the chief addressed the camp. "This woman was cast out for not fitting what we thought was right," he said, voice echoing in the still air. But when the world turned against her, she did not break. She brought back a lost child. She brought back herself. "We must ask, what is our strength if not our ability to care for our own?" Her uncle bristled. "She brings trouble, white man's trouble. His enemies will follow. The tribe is in danger." The chief's gaze was unwavering. "Danger finds those who are divided, not those who stand together." There was a murmur of agreement, some faces softening. Will, understanding little of the words but everything of the tension, touched Nahava's elbow. "Is this safe?" he whispered. Nahava hesitated. Safer than being alone in the wild, but not safe from every old grudge. At the edge of the fire, the boy had begun to eat, his fear melting into quiet hunger. One of the elder women, gray-braided and stern, offered him another piece of bread. Nahava's heart lightened. Maybe, just maybe, they'd be allowed to stay. But her uncle was not finished. He stood abruptly, drawing the attention of everyone. "A fat girl shamed us. A white man brings fire to our door, and you call this strength?" His voice cut through the camp, sharp as a knife. The chief raised a hand to quiet the crowd, but the damage was done. Suspicion flickered in the eyes of some, resentment in others. Will stood, calm but unyielding. "I lost my home because I protected her. I'd do it again. If that's shame, then so be it." Nahava's voice trembled, but she forced herself to speak. "You sold me because I was too much for you to understand. You let me go when I needed you most. But I survived. I found kindness outside what you called home." A silence fell. The old woman who'd fed the boy spoke up. "The world is changing. Hunger doesn't care if you are thin or strong. The snow kills the weak and the proud alike. Tonight, let the living eat together. Tomorrow, we choose again what kind of people we want to be." The chief nodded. "Tonight, they stay. Anyone who raises a hand against them raises a hand against me." The statement was final. For the first time, Nahava let herself breathe deeply. Will put an arm around her shoulders, not as a claim but as comfort. Later, by the dying fire, Will, Nahava, and the boy sat alone at the edge of the camp. Nahava leaned against Will, exhaustion settling into her bones. I thought I'd never come back here, she murmured. Will stroked her hair, gentle. You don't have to stay if you don't want to. We can keep moving, find a place of our own. Nahava gazed at the stars, the shapes of her people's stories painted across the sky. I don't know what I want yet, but I want to choose, for the first time in my life. The boy lay curled between them, safe for now. But as the last embers faded, Nahava's uncle watched them from the shadows, his face twisted with resolve. She knew this peace was fragile. In the darkness, he spoke to a young warrior in a low, urgent voice, plotting, perhaps, to force her out for good. Before dawn, Nahava was jolted awake by a hand on her shoulder, a whisper, "Come," quietly. She froze. Was it rescue, or the start of another betrayal? Nahava's heart pounded as she sat up, blinking against the darkness. For a split second, she expected to see her uncle looming over her, but it was the grey-haired woman from the fire, her face stern, but not unkind. The woman pressed a finger to her lips and gestured for Nahava to follow. Will and the boy stirred beside her, but Nahava motioned for them to stay put. "Wait here, I'll be right back," she whispered, forcing her voice to stay calm. Outside the circle of tents, the night air was bitingly cold. Frost glistened on the grass and the moon was a thin, sharp blade overhead. The old woman walked ahead, swift and silent. Nahava followed, her breath coming in white clouds, her mind spinning with anxiety. They stopped behind a shelter made of saplings and animal hides, hidden from the rest of the camp. "I saw your uncle speaking with Red Crow," the woman said in a low voice. "He's angry. He'll try to force the chief's hand tomorrow, maybe sooner. You must be careful, Nahava. If he cannot drive you out, he may try something worse." Nahava swallowed hard, dread coiling in her gut. "What can I do? I have nowhere else to go. Not now. And Will, the boy..." Her voice trailed off. The woman's expression softened a little. "You are stronger than you think, and not alone anymore. But you must show them your worth, your courage. Apache respect those who fight for family, even if the family is not of blood." Nahava considered her words. "If they turn on me, I'll fight. But I won't run again. Not after all I've been through." The woman nodded approvingly. "Good, but be wise. At sunrise, stand with your man. Show them you have nothing to hide." As Nahava made her way back, she caught a glimpse of two men near the edge of camp, whispering and watching the main fire. One of them was her uncle, the other the broad-shouldered Red Crow, famous for his quick temper and his loyalty to the old ways. She hurried to Will and the boy, shaking them gently awake. "Something's coming," she murmured. "Stay close to me in the morning. Whatever happens, we face it together." Will didn't ask for details. He just nodded, his hand wrapping around hers in the dark, steady and warm. Dawn crept up grey and slow, painting the camp in pale light. Nahava rose early, washed her face in the icy stream, and braided her hair back tightly, her hands steady despite her nerves. The boy clung to her side, sensing the tension. Will stood by the tent flap, scanning the camp with wary eyes. By the time the sun broke over the trees, a small crowd had gathered around the fire. The chief sat cross-legged, his face grave. Nahava's uncle stood at his shoulder, Red Crow beside him, his arms folded. The old woman from the night before hovered at the edge, watching. The chief spoke first, his voice firm. "This morning we speak, before all. Nahava, you return to us, but not alone. Some say you bring shame, others say you bring courage. The truth will decide." Her uncle didn't wait for an invitation. "She left us fat, lazy, weak. Now she returns, bringing a white man who has trouble on his trail. The child, no one knows whose he is. If we let her stay, we invite ruin." Will stiffened, anger burning in his eyes. Nahava put a hand on his arm, shaking her head slightly. "Let me speak." She stepped forward, shoulders square. "You cast me out because I did not fit your narrow idea of worth. But out there I survived. I cared for this boy when no one else would. And Will, he risked everything to protect us both, even though he owes us nothing." She looked out over the faces, some hostile, some uncertain. "I am not here to beg. I am here because I chose to return. If you want to judge, judge by what I have done, not how I look. I will work, I will fight for this camp, but I will not run anymore. If that's not enough, then do what you will." There was a long, tense silence. Red Crow spat on the ground. "Words are easy. The chief's patience is softer than old hide. Why should we trust an outcast and a white man with the safety of our children?" Will stepped up beside Nahava. "I won't let any harm come to your people. I came here for her. I'll prove myself, any way you want." The chief studied them for a long time. "There is a way," he said. "Prove your strength. Go out at dawn tomorrow. Bring back something that will feed the camp. If you do, both of you and the boy can stay. If not, you leave and you never return." Nahava's heart leapt with both fear and hope. "We'll do it," she said, voice steady. The crowd began to murmur, some with skepticism, others with interest. But as the group dispersed, her uncle lingered. "Don't get comfortable," he hissed in Nahava's ear. "One day of hunting won't make you family again." That night, as Nahava and Will prepared for the test at dawn, a shadow moved near their tent. Someone was watching, waiting for their first mistake. The cold before sunrise felt sharper than ever as Nahava lay awake, listening for footsteps outside their tent. Every muscle in her body ached with tension. She kept thinking about the way her uncle's words lingered, poisonous and thick. Even after he'd walked away, she was determined not to let him or anyone else push her out again. Will was already up, quietly checking his rifle and packing what little food they had left. He moved with a focus Nahava hadn't seen before. No hesitation, no wasted energy, just the measured certainty of someone who knew what was at stake. The boy stirred, bleary-eyed but eager, sensing the importance of the day. Nahava knelt and wrapped her arms around him, whispering encouragement. "Stay close, listen to Will, and do what he says. Today we show them who we really are." By the time they stepped outside, most of the camp was already stirring. The chief waited at the edge of the woods, flanked by Red Crow and a few others, including Nahava's uncle, whose eyes glittered with expectation. The old woman watched from a distance, her arms folded tightly, face unreadable. "Go," the chief said simply, pointing to the ridgeline where the forest thickened. "Return by sunset, or not at all." Will nodded. Nahava squared her shoulders and followed him into the woods, the boy trailing close behind. The trees closed around them, muffling the sounds of the camp. Here, in the cold, shadowed quiet, Nahava felt the familiar surge of anxiety give way to determination. She had survived worse than this. Will moved through the underbrush with purpose, scanning for tracks, his breath visible in the crisp air. Nahava kept watch behind them, alert for any sign they were being followed. She didn't trust her uncle or Red Crow not to sabotage them if they got the chance. After a long hour, Will crouched by a set of fresh deer tracks. "We'll have to move fast if we want to catch up," he whispered. Nahava nodded and signaled the boy to stay close. They moved quietly, every step a test of patience and focus. Branches snapped underfoot, and the world narrowed to the sound of their breathing, the occasional caw of a distant crow. It was the boy who first spotted movement, a flash of brown against the snow-dusted brush. Nahava signaled for silence, and Will raised his rifle, steadying his aim. The deer froze, ears flicking. For a split second, Nahava's heart stopped, everything balanced on this moment. Then Will squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest, and the deer collapsed in the brush. Relief flooded through Nahava, mingled with adrenaline and disbelief. They hurried to the animal, working together to field dress it and prepare for the journey back. Will handed Nahava the knife, and she worked with swift, practiced motions, the boy helping wherever he could. They wrapped the meat in their coats, tying it with lengths of rope Will had brought. As they began the slow trek back, Nahava couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Once or twice she caught movement among the trees, a dark figure darting away whenever she turned. Her uncle, Red Crow, someone else. She gritted her teeth, determined not to let fear control her. They reached the edge of the camp as the sun began to sink low, their arms heavy with meat and exhaustion. A small crowd gathered, curiosity and skepticism battling in their eyes. Nahava's uncle stood at the front, jaw clenched, arms folded tight. The chief stepped forward, inspecting their prize. "You did well," he said quietly, turning so all could hear. "This will feed many. You've proven yourselves." For a moment, Nahava thought the ordeal was over. Then Red Crow stepped up, face hard. "One good hunt doesn't make you Apache. Blood does. Loyalty does. And outsiders," he spat on the ground, "can never understand that." Nahava stood her ground, shoulders squared. "I am Apache. My blood may not be thin, and I may not be the daughter you wanted, but I am your kin. I fought to live when you turned me away. I fought for this boy when no one else would, and now I fight for a place here, not because you offer it, but because I choose it," Red Crow sneered, but the chief raised a hand, silencing further protest. "Enough. She has earned her place, and so has the man who stood by her." Will, breathing hard but steady, met the chief's eyes. "We only want to live in peace." Nahava's uncle glared, but something in his face had shifted, a trace of doubt, maybe even fear. The crowd murmured, "Uncertain." For the first time, Nahava saw the possibility that things could truly change. That night, as the meat roasted over the communal fire, Nahava and Will sat side by side, the boy between them. For the first time since her exile, Nahava felt not just tolerated but seen. But as the camp settled into uneasy sleep, a whisper ran through the shadows. Red Crow and her uncle weren't finished yet. Tomorrow, Nahava would face a choice that could cost her everything she'd fought to regain. As the embers died down, Nahava heard footsteps outside their tent, then the low, urgent voice of the old woman. "Wake up. There's no time. They're coming for you tonight." Nahava shot upright, heart pounding as the old woman's hand clamped gently but firmly on her shoulder. In the dim glow of the fire outside, she saw the deep lines etched in the woman's face, saw fear and urgency burning in her eyes. "Quickly," the old woman whispered. "Gather your things. Red Crow and your uncle. They have convinced others that tonight is their chance. They plan to drive you out before dawn, or worse." Will woke at the commotion, instantly alert. The boy, sensing the fear, pressed himself into Nahava's side. There was no time to question, to protest, or to plan. Nahava nodded once, her movements precise and quiet. She grabbed her bag, a skin of water, and the knife Will had sharpened earlier that day. Will slung his rifle over his shoulder, his jaw set. Outside, shadows danced against the sides of the tents, voices hushed but tense, the murmur of a crowd forming. The old woman led them around the edge of the camp, keeping low, guiding them past the communal fire, now reduced to embers. Every few steps, Nahava's breath caught, half expecting a shout or the glint of steel. The boy gripped her hand so tightly her knuckles ached. Behind them, a dog barked, and a shout rose up, Red Crow's voice, rough with anger. "They're gone! Find them!" In an instant, the whole camp was in motion. Men with torches ran toward the river, others searched the woods. Will and Nahava slipped into the darkness, following the old woman along a narrow animal path she seemed to know by heart. They moved quickly, but not recklessly, ducking into the underbrush whenever footsteps drew too near. Will led from the front, checking each turn, every fallen log, every break in the brush. Nahava moved silently, the boy never letting go. The old woman whispering encouragement, urging them on. It wasn't until they reached the deep ravine at the edge of camp that they stopped to catch their breath. The sound of pursuit faded a little, but Red Crow's voice still echoed through the night. "She will not shame us. She is no Apache." The boy trembled, but Nahava squeezed his shoulder. "You're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you." The old woman turned to Nahava, her eyes soft with a pride that felt hard-won. "You are stronger than they know. You do not run because you are afraid. You run to protect what is right." Will crouched at the edge of the ravine, scanning the darkness. "We can't keep running forever. If we leave now, we're giving them exactly what they want. But if we turn back, we risk everything." His voice was low, but determined. "Nahava, this is your call." Nahava felt every muscle in her body tense. For a moment, the urge to flee nearly overpowered her, the old fear of being outcast, alone, forgotten. But then she looked at the boy, at Will, and at the old woman. "We can't run. Not this time." She turned to Will, meeting his eyes. If we hide, they'll hunt us forever. But if we return, if we stand our ground in front of everyone, make them see us, not as a curse but as family, maybe we can end this. Will nodded. Then we faced them, together. They crept back through the woods, avoiding the main path, circling until they could see the camp again. Fires blazed higher now, and the crowd had grown. Red Crow stood in the center, shouting at the chief. The entire camp riled up, torn between tradition and something new that felt dangerous. The old woman walked ahead, her back straight, her head high. Nahava followed, Will at her side, the boy's small hand still locked in hers. As they emerged from the trees, the camp fell silent. Every face turned toward them, torches flickering, anger and fear crackling in the cold night air. Red Crow advanced, his eyes wild. "You don't belong here! You shame your blood!" "Seguptu and take your outsider with you." Nahava's uncle hung back, uncertainty on his face, torn between loyalty to Red Crow and the undeniable strength his niece had shown. The chief's face was grave, unreadable. Nahava stepped forward, voice steady and strong. "I was born here. I survived exile. I hunted when you said I couldn't. I proved I have Apache blood, not by what I look like, but by what I endure and how I care for those who have no one. If you drive us out, you lose more than just me. You lose your honor." The crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling like wind through the pines. The old woman stepped to Nahava's side, raising her chin. "I vouch for her. I have seen her spirit. She is Apache, whether you name her so or not." Will spoke next, his voice quiet but clear. "I never asked to take anything from your tribe. I only wanted to give Nahava and the boy a home. But if you force us out, we will make one elsewhere. One built on kindness, not fear." Red Crow's face twisted with rage. But now, several in the crowd looked away, ashamed or doubtful. The chief stood silent, eyes fixed on Nahava. The standoff hung in the icy air, every second a question. Would they finally be accepted, or would they be forced to disappear into the darkness for good? As the tension reached its peak, the chief finally spoke. "At sunrise, we will decide. Until then, no one lays a hand on them." But as Nahava looked into the firelight, she saw Red Crow's hand on his knife, and she knew the true danger wasn't over yet. The camp didn't sleep that night. Nahava and Will sat on the ground near the fire, the boy curled between them, and the old woman keeping watch with eyes sharp as flint. All around them, small knots of people argued in low voices, some angry, some confused, a few even sympathetic. Red Crow and his loyal followers huddled near the chief's tent, plotting, eyes darting toward Nahava with venom and suspicion. Nahava's uncle avoided her gaze, pacing the far side of the camp. Now and then, he would glance over as if he wanted to say something, but each time shame drove him away. The chief himself sat with his back to the fire, silent, weighing the fate of his people, and perhaps, for the first time, what it would mean to lose someone like Nahava. Will, sensing the gravity, stayed close. He placed a hand on her knee. "I don't trust him," he murmured, nodding at Red Crow. "We should keep the fire high. If they try something tonight, at least we'll see them coming." The old woman nodded in agreement. "I've seen many winters, Nahava. Men like Red Crow, fear is all they have. If you show them you're not afraid, you'll win more hearts than you know." But Nahava's mind spun with doubt. Would courage be enough? Would anyone stand up for her if violence erupted? She gazed at the sleeping boy, at Will's determined face, at the embers burning low, and tried to draw strength from them. As the night deepened, a bitter wind swept across the camp. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called, echoing the loneliness Nahava felt in her bones. Still, she sat tall. If she was going to be judged at sunrise, she would meet it with her head held high. Suddenly, a shadow shifted at the edge of the firelight. Nahava stiffened, ready to wake Will, but the figure stopped. Her uncle. He hesitated, hands trembling, then knelt beside her. "I was wrong, Nahava," he whispered, barely audible. "You've always been braver than I ever was. I let Red Crow fill me with shame and anger. I was afraid of what others would say if I stood up for you. But you don't deserve to pay for our weakness." Nahava studied him for a long moment. Pain and regret twisted his face. "Then stand with me when the sun rises," she said softly. "Let them see you're not afraid either." He nodded, a single tear tracing a line down his weathered cheek. "I will." As dawn crept over the mountains, the tribe gathered again in the main circle, tension thicker than the morning mist. The chief stood before the people, staff in hand, eyes dark and searching. Nahava, Will, the boy, the old woman, and her uncle stood together, a small island against the shifting tide of the crowd. Red Crow stepped forward, defiant. "This girl brings strangers among us. She shames our ways. If we allow her to stay, what happens to our honor?" Before the chief could answer, Nahava's uncle raised his voice, wavering but clear. "I have been silent too long. My niece is no curse. She is Apache in spirit and blood. If you send her away, you send me too." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Several older women stepped forward, one after another. "I saw her bring food to my sick husband when others forgot him," said one. "She saved my son from drowning last spring," another added. "She hunted when others starved." One by one, voices rose, not many, but enough to sow uncertainty among Red Crow's followers. The old woman spoke last, voice ringing. "We are more than blood and pride. We are what we do. Nahava has given more to this tribe than many who call themselves pure." Red Crow's face flushed. "You let a stranger speak for us. She is not one of us." But the chief raised his hand, silencing the argument. He turned to Nahava. "You've endured more than most. You have shown strength and mercy, even to those who doubted you. But tradition is not easily changed. If you stay, you must do so not as a shadow, but as one of us, openly, proudly. And the boy and the cowboy, what place do they have here?" Nahava looked at Will. He met her eyes, calm and steady. "We make our home where we're wanted, but I will not ask for what isn't freely given." The boy looked up, hope flickering across his tired face. "Please, let us stay." The chief regarded the trio, then addressed the tribe. "Who here would see them stay?" Slowly, hands rose, first Nahava's uncle, then the old woman, then a handful of others. It wasn't a majority, but it was enough. The chief nodded. "Let it be so. They will stay." Red Crow stormed away, but not before casting one last threatening look at Nahava and Will. As the crowd began to disperse, Nahava felt relief, but deep down she knew. Red Crow's anger hadn't faded. It had only retreated, waiting for the next chance to strike. Nahava barely had time to process what had happened before the old woman leaned close, her voice a soft warning. "Be careful, child. Red Crow's pride is wounded. That kind of man does not forget." Will squeezed Nahava's hand under the table, and the boy clung to her side as if afraid someone might snatch him away. For a few brief moments, Nahava let herself believe they might be safe. For the first time since she'd stumbled into the Apache camp with the child in her arms, she allowed herself to hope that they could finally belong. But as the tribe returned to its daily routines, a strange tension lingered. Watchful glances, murmurs, and the sense that something was brewing just beyond the reach of their little circle of warmth and acceptance. Nahava tried to keep busy, gathering water from the stream and helping Will repair the horse's bridle. She did her best to ignore the unease, but she could feel it growing, coiling like a snake in the tall grass. Later that afternoon, Nahava's uncle pulled her aside behind the cook fire. "Red Crow is gathering his friends," he whispered. "He's not done. He says you brought the sickness on the tribe, that you are still cursed. I fear he'll try to force the chief's hand, or worse, act on his own." Nahava's pulse raced. "What can we do?" He shook his head. "Be ready. If trouble comes, go to the riverbank at nightfall. There is a hollow in the rocks. You, Will, and the boy can hide there until sunrise." Nahava nodded, swallowing her fear. She shared the plan with Will in hushed tones, and together they packed a small bundle, bread, a blanket, the boy's carved animal, and a flask of water. Will kissed Nahava's forehead. "If anything happens, I won't leave your side." As dusk settled, the camp quieted unnaturally. The chief's fire burned low. The old woman kept her shawl drawn tightly and kept the boy close. Nahava felt each second stretch, waiting, dreading. Then, Just as the stars began to prick the sky, a shout rang out, a commotion near the chief's tent. Will grabbed Nahava's hand. "Now," he whispered. Together, they hurried with the boy through the dark toward the riverbank, the sounds of argument and anger rising behind them. They slipped into the hollow, pressed together, hearts thundering in the darkness. From their hiding place, Nahava could see the camp flickering with torchlight as Red Crow and a knot of men marched toward the chief's fire, voices raised in fury. "She brings misfortune. She is not Apache," Red Crow roared. "If you do nothing, then you are as weak as she is." The chief stood, tall and unmoving. "Enough, you have spoken, and so have others. This tribe stands by the decision. You will not bring violence here." But Red Crow would not yield. He lunged forward, grabbing for the chief's arm. In an instant, Nahava's uncle and two others pulled Red Crow back, but the struggle broke the fragile peace. Someone knocked a torch to the ground. Flames caught in the dry grass. Women screamed, scattering with children. The camp exploded into chaos as men tried to stomp the fire and others clashed, old feuds and buried anger erupting all at once. Nahava wanted to run to her uncle, to help, but Will gripped her arm. "Wait, it's too dangerous." The boy whimpered, burying his face against Nahava's chest. The noise outside grew louder, shouts and the crackle of flames. Then suddenly, a gunshot split the air. Silence fell for a heartbeat, then the camp erupted in panic. From the hollow, Nahava watched as Red Crow staggered, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. The chief stood over him, holding an old rifle, face pale with shock. "No more," the chief declared, voice hoarse but firm. "This ends tonight." Red Crow's allies scattered, dragging their wounded leader away. The old woman hurried toward the riverbank, waving Nahava and Will from their hiding place. "Come quickly, it's safe now." They ran to the chief's tent, where the wounded were being tended and the flames finally doused. The chief met Nahava's eyes, his own rimmed red with fatigue and pain. "I regret what happened, child. But you are one of us now. No one will question it again." Nahava nodded, exhaustion weighing on her. Will squeezed her hand, and the boy hugged her waist. As the first light of dawn touched the battered camp, Nahava knew everything had changed again. She was not just tolerated now, but accepted, paid for in fire and blood. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that some wounds would never fully heal. As Nahava drifted to sleep beside Will and the boy, the old woman whispered in her ear, "Rest now, but do not forget, true belonging is built every day, not given in a single night." Tomorrow you must decide. The camp was silent as the sun rose, its pale light painting the smoldering ground with hesitant hope. The night's violence had left scars, burnt grass, trampled earth, shaken faces gathered around small fires. Nahava woke stiff and aching, Will's arm around her, and the boy curled between them, breathing softly. She stared at the sky, her mind replaying every moment. Red Crow's anger, the shot that saved them, the chief's weary acceptance. As the tribe tried to return to normal, Nahava felt eyes on her. Some grateful, others suspicious, most simply exhausted. She kept her head high, guiding the boy through the morning's chores and helping Will repair the fence along the southern edge of camp. Will squeezed her hand whenever he could, grounding her in the new, fragile peace. By midday, the chief called the tribe together. He stood by the main fire, his face lined but resolute. Nahava, Will, and the boy joined the circle, uncertain, while Red Crow watched from the shadows, his arm in a sling, his supporters sullen and silent. The chief's voice rang out, steady but heavy. "This tribe has suffered much. We have lost people to illness, to cold, to fighting among ourselves. Last night we nearly lost more, but we did not. This girl," he gestured to Nahava, "came to us alone, unwanted by her own, but she risked her life to save one of ours. She has done nothing but help us. Any who challenge her place here challenge me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nahava felt tears prick her eyes, relief, gratitude, and a fear that still lurked beneath the surface. She squeezed the boy's hand, feeling his trust, and glanced at Will. He nodded at her, pride shining in his gaze. Red Crow spat at the ground, But the chief's supporters closed ranks, and for the first time, his anger seemed small. The old woman, who had always watched over Nahava and the boy, stepped forward. "Let her speak," she said, her voice strong despite her years. Nahava hesitated, but Will whispered, "Tell them." She swallowed hard and stepped into the circle, feeling every eye upon her. "I was cast out because I was different, because I did not fit the shape my people wanted. But I am not weak," Nahava said, her voice trembling at first, then steadying. "I survived. I found this boy alone. I helped Will when he was hurt. I worked for this tribe, not for reward, but because I wanted to belong. I am not Apache by blood, but I am here by choice. If you let me, I will work, and I will fight for this place and everyone in it." The silence stretched. Faces shifted, some softening, some hard. Then the old woman smiled, and a few others nodded. Even the chief seemed to breathe easier. Will stepped to Nahava's side. "You took me in when I was a stranger," he said, looking at the tribe. "Now it's your turn to take her in. We're stronger together." A slow ripple of assent moved through the camp. Some still hesitated, but no one stepped forward to oppose. The chief nodded. "It is settled. This family stays." Relief crashed through Nahava. The boy squeezed her waist, smiling shyly for the first time since she'd found him. Will grinned, letting his arm rest around both of them. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family, fragile, patched together, but real. But as dusk fell, Will noticed smoke rising far off in the west, toward the hills where the old wagon trails ran. He frowned. "We may not be as safe as we think." Nahava followed his gaze, worry settling in her chest. "What is it?" Will's voice was tight. "That's not campfire smoke. Someone's coming." Night brought new tension. Riders approached, strangers, not part of the tribe. The chief called for quiet, and the camp gathered their few weapons. Nahava stood ready, the boy clinging to her leg, Will at her side with an old rifle. As the riders entered the firelight, one called out, "We're looking for a runaway, a girl big for her age, traveling with a white man and a stolen Apache child." The chief's jaw tightened. "No one like that here," he lied without blinking. Will held his breath. Nahava's heart hammered. The leader of the riders dismounted, spurs jangling. He eyed Nahava and the boy, suspicion narrowing his gaze. "We've got orders to bring her back. You hiding someone?" No one answered. Tension crackled in the air. The old woman stepped forward. "No one is for sale here," she said, her voice like stone. The standoff lasted an eternity. Finally, the riders, sensing they were outnumbered, cursed and rode off into the night, vowing to return. As the dust settled, Nahava realized that their fight for belonging was far from over. They had won this battle, but the world outside was still waiting to test them again. The tribe was safe for now, but Nahava knew that true peace would only come if they were willing to defend each other, not just from outsiders, but from the old wounds that still lingered within. The first real peace settled over the camp with the coming of spring, quiet and steady as the thaw. Nahava woke each morning to the sound of the river running strong again, to birds calling in the cottonwoods, to the steady rhythm of work and life rebuilding. For the first time since she'd been tied to that tree, she allowed herself to believe this might truly be home. There were days when the memory of her old tribe still burned, faces turned away, harsh words whispered, the cold sting of shame. But now, those memories didn't have the same power. They were just ghosts, fading as new habits formed, braiding the boy's hair, helping Will mend fences, sharing bread with the old woman by the fire. Will took to teaching the boy to ride, steadying him with gentle patience, laughing when he fell and cheering when he stayed upright. Nahava watched them, her heart tight with gratitude and a happiness she'd never let herself expect. The boy, now called Asa, a name chosen for a new start, began to smile more often, running from chores to chase stray chickens, his laughter startling crows from the fields. Each member of the tribe found small ways to show Nahava she was part of them. The chief invited her to council meetings, the old woman taught her to grind herbs for medicine, and the younger women asked for her help carrying water or splitting wood. Even Red Crow, still nursing his pride and his wounds, began to nod to her in the mornings, grudging respect replacing suspicion, but the threat from the outside world remained. Each time riders passed near the camp, the tribe tightened its defenses, watching, waiting. Nahava felt the old fear rising, but now she faced it standing tall, knowing she was not alone. Will stayed close, his eyes always scanning the horizon. "If trouble comes," he told her one evening, "we face it together. I'm not letting anyone take you or Asa, not now, not ever." And then, on a morning bright with new grass and wildflowers, the riders returned. This time, they didn't bother with threats. They waited at the edge of the trees, watching the camp with hungry, calculating eyes. The chief gathered everyone in a circle, his voice calm but clear. "We decide together. Do we hide? Do we fight? Or do we run?" Nahava looked at Will, then at Asa, then at the faces around her, some frightened, some resolute. She thought of how far she'd come, of the pain she'd survived, and of the belonging she'd finally found. She stood, her voice steady. "We stay, we defend what we've built. If we run, they'll just hunt us again. But if we stand, they'll learn we are not weak." The decision was unanimous. That night, the tribe prepared quietly, weapons checked, sentries posted. Will showed Nahava how to load the old rifle. The chief's sons set traps along the trail. Asa helped carry wood to reinforce the fences. The standoff lasted 3 days. The riders circled, probing, waiting for weakness. But the camp held firm, and on the 4th dawn, the riders finally turned away, defeated by the tribe's resolve. As relief washed over them, Nahava felt the last weight of her past begin to lift. She looked around at the people who had become her family, at Will, who had chosen her not out of pity but out of love and respect, at Asa, no longer a scared boy, but a child with a future, at the tribe, stronger for what they'd faced together. In the weeks that followed, life found a new, joyful rhythm. The spring rains brought fresh shoots, and with them, the promise of another season. Nahava and Will planted a garden near the river, Asa chasing frogs in the mud, while the old woman sang songs from her childhood. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Will and Nahava sat together on the porch of the little cabin they'd begun to build. The sounds of the tribe drifted through the air, laughter, music, the crackle of distant fires. Asa slept inside, his face peaceful in the lamplight. Will squeezed Nahava's hand. "You know," he said, "I used to think I was meant to be alone. I never thought I'd find someone who'd fight so hard just to belong." Nahava rested her head on his shoulder, watching the stars appear one by one. "I was told all my life I wasn't good enough, that I was too much of something and not enough of something else. But here, I learned I am enough, more than enough." He kissed her gently, a promise more lasting than words. And as the night settled in, Nahava whispered a silent vow to protect what they had, to honor the family they'd chosen, and to never let shame or fear steal her place in the world again. Their story, whispered through the hills and across the plains, became a quiet legend, not of the girl who was tied to a tree, but of the woman who stood her ground, built a family from ruin, and taught everyone around her that belonging is not given, but claimed. If Nahava's journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true-hearted stories. And tell us, if you found someone alone in the wild, would you offer them a home too?